Okay, thank you, Pauline, for your interesting presentation. I think it's a very special way to look at the impact of digitalization for on the different aspects of the law, but maybe particular for the island of Curaçao, as we are a very small island, maybe there we have to look at some other points that will not be really applicable to us. So it's very interesting to discuss that later on. I would like to open the floor for the dialogue session, and I would like to invite Gilberto Morishaw to ask a question or share his thoughts about or on this topic. Gilberto?
I am so ready. I have notes, so that's going to be good. First of all, thank you so very much for the very good insights and great conversations that have been started within this session. Especially, I really loved, Dr. Pauline, about your focus on the normative frameworks, because often when we talk about tech, we don't really talk about, and I always like to say, you know, like technology, it is often cyclical, right? It often embodies the cycles of the normative frameworks and the ideologies and the guiding paradigms that guide a specific society. You know, your tech effectivity is only going to be as good as the underlying philosophies behind it. So when you mentioned, and I think Dr. Hilhorst also mentioned the 𝗏𝗏 affair, Hilhorst, forgive me. Dr. Hilhorst also mentioned the 𝗏𝗏 affair, and that's a unique example of in your face of how when your society has specific racial biases or racist elements within it, that it will also come out in your policy and it will impact the lives of people. And so what we're seeing right now with the metaverse, right, is that it is anti-cyclical in the sense that it is, and in that sense, I think maybe there's a bit of divergence in opinions between me and you, Dr. Pauline, that there is, on the one hand, it does shake the foundations of the system, but at the same time, it also is very cyclical. It only doubles down on the ideas that are already existing in the sense of extractivism, in the sense of exploitation, in the sense of, you know, a very destructive, manipulative type of way of thinking. And we see that in big tech, especially right now, when you spoke about democracy, democracies, globally speaking, are at risk. But we also see that on the ground, right? In Curaçao, for example, when we look at social media, it often has very toxic elements within it, right? So that when we talk about social media regulation, how do you deal with certain toxic Facebook pages like, I don't know, Curaçao jokes, for example, that tend to very much peddle this extremely closed-minded way of thinking and bullying online that has reached a large national scale. So we got to talk about that too. We also need to talk about the gig economy and what it is doing in other countries, because what I see on the ground in Curaçao is we want to digitalize. Oh yeah, we need to do this. We need to have an Uber. We need to have all of these things. But what we don't talk about is which negative impacts that has had on big societies globally. And we should be very mindful and intentional when it comes to speaking about digitalization and about innovation, because innovation without purpose behind it, innovation for innovation itself will only lead to cataclysm, because then we'll be making an AI Terminator bot and it was like, oh yeah, but it's so cool and it's shiny and it's great. But at the same time, it's dangerous, because if your society does not develop the philosophies and the understandings and the complexity and the ability to deal with this complexity needed for you to survive, for you to try, for you to make purposeful and good, effective use of this technology, then your society will only misuse it. And for example, I
think I would like to ask Pauline Phoa if she wants to respond to your comments.
Well, I really agree, and I really feel you, Gilberto. I think we're thinking along the same lines, and I'm so happy that you're saying, you know, innovation without purpose, you know, kind of leads to a cataclysm. And I really and it's not kind of trendy, because usually, you know, people go like, oh yes, we need this shiny new thing and we need to embrace all of these developments. But I really want to encourage you also to be very critical of, do you want Uber? And especially with the gig economy, we see such a negative impact. Also now with kind of the COVID crisis, that as a consumer, it's very easy to have, you know, everything delivered within 24 hours or even, you know, within 12 hours or something. But it leads to kind of a new kind of slavery and a devaluation. And for me as a consumer, everything is so cheap that I don't see the true costs. And that's a problem. That's a real, and I mean, who is taking these jobs? It's already marginalized communities. So I really, and this is where my activism comes out as well. But I really second what you're observing. Yeah, I fully agree.
Okay, thank you, Pauline. Professor Hilhorst, would you like to comment?
Yes, actually, I would like to comment, and I would also like to answer one of the questions in the Q&A a little bit. Yes. It was about is Curaçao not too small for these kinds of institutions to think about digitization? And I think there's also something like ignorance. And I think what Pauline and what I'm telling is that with digitization, there are a lot of challenges you should be thinking about, not only in a normative framework, like what is the world you would like to live in, but also practically, like take small steps and see where you're, be very much aware of where you're heading. Because what I see, for example, if we look at the Netherlands, it's always not only sometimes ignorance, but also unwillingness. For example, the toeslagenaffaire could only have happened in a culture of a specific culture of where excessive anti-fraud sentiments were alive. So this would never have happened. It's not, I mean, in this case, technology is not neutral. It's the culture that really brought to the table all these problems, I think. So even if you're a small island and you're taking small steps, it's very you can still being aware of all these issues. You can still build a nice and good society and deal with technology in a good way.
And I would add, yeah.
I would like to look at the Q&A box that we have at the Q&A session. So Professor Hilhorst, I don't know if you would like me to read them, or did you already look at them? And is there a question that you want to address?
I'll check the last one for digital success in the next lesson.
Otherwise, I can ask Mrs. Phoa first about the question that Anneloes van den Ende is.
Sorry, I do have, actually I looked at the last question, and it's about how can you invest in organizational IT capabilities and skills. And I think one of the main issues that we mention here, and I think Pauline does this, and I did this at the same time, is that digitization affects all areas in a society. It's not only policy making, it's not only supervision of IT projects, which is very practical. It's not only law, it's not only ethical issues. And I think what is very important is that in all these areas, you have to, so to say, grow up a little bit. And what we see in the Dutch government is that it takes time to grow up and to understand the wideness of this subject. So yeah, that's what I would like to add, that it takes small steps, and you can learn from what happens in the Netherlands also.
So that's very interesting to delve deeper into that topic. So do you maybe have like a top three do's or don'ts that we can learn from the Dutch challenges from digitalization that will be applicable also in the island?
Well, concerning IT projects and IT investments and IT skills, I would always say, think about the organizational or societal issues that you would like to solve instead of focusing on technology. So what is the problem you would like to solve, and how is technology going to help you in that? And using the normative framework that Pauline introduced, actually, what would perfect look like, and how can you take small steps towards this perfect situation? That would be a good way of dealing with IT and digitization.
Okay, thank you. Let me see, there's also a question, let me see, from 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝗶 for Pauline. And looking to modernize our local laws with digitalization in mind, we will, of course, need to look at how Europe has framed their laws. But are there other jurisdictions we should also look at?
Yeah, definitely. I saw. Thank you for your question, Joost. Well, one of the obvious different jurisdictions in the world is the US system. And I'm going to exaggerate a little bit, but there's a sharp contrast between the EU approach, which is more kind of based on the precautionary principle, so better safe than sorry, and privacy by design and safety by design. So they're quite heavy on the regulatory side, and in the US, historically, traditionally, they say, well, let's leave it to the market. So innovate whatever you want, just do whatever you want, and then kind of the market mechanisms they place a lot of trust in the market mechanism will kind of course correct and will weed out all kinds of negative side effects. And of course, history teaches us that is not true.
It doesn't.
And it's and it shifts because they usually rely, so they are very light on the regulatory side, and then they rely a lot on, for instance, mass claims and damages actions of consumers to kind of punish big corporations for the wrongdoing. But obviously that places consumers and citizens at a disadvantage, procedurally. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money to do these claims. So anyway, yes, so the US has this more kind of laissez-faire strategy, leave it to the markets. And obviously from an innovation point of view, that's more attractive than the European approach. Yeah. So if you want to, for instance, let Curaçao be this kind of innovation hub, and you want to really, really encourage digital innovations, then it can be a conscious choice to be more light-handed on, the regulatory side. So that is, I think, the most salient example. Yeah, the US. And then shall I move also to Anneloes van der Endes?
Yes, and also maybe 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝘶 also asked a question about measurement of innovation and the impact of government transformation programs. Maybe you can, or Professor Hilhorst can comment on that.
Yeah. So first, so shall I answer Anneloes van der Endes' question first?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you're asking. So I use the example of the e-commerce directive and that some of the assumptions may not work on big tech. And what are other assumptions within Dutch or EU laws related to digitalization that you can learn from? So a really important assumption in a lot of these different laws is the idea that the consumer of these services, so we are rational individuals. And this assumption is, and there's a lot of research going on right now that really challenges this assumption, because online there is so much nudging and hyper nudging going on you know, with these filter bubbles and this targeted marketing, that you can really ask, so how rational and kind of relatively well informed is this benchmark consumer still? Or are we, and I have a colleague who is researching hyper-nudging in the context of targeted marketing. And she really poses the question, so is there still free will as a consumer if you're really, you know, using a lot of online services? So that is an assumption that I think is really, really problematic, because it's, I think as a consumer, we're much more vulnerable than online than in an analog situation. Because, you know, if you don't like the bread of one baker, you can just walk away. Whereas if you're in this online environment, and if you've accepted all of those cookies that I know almost everyone does, then you're kind of followed by the baker around, you know, that you're followed around and you're targeted until you really want that bread that you didn't want in the first place. So that really shifts how you think about the consumer. So I think that's one of the assumptions. It's also a very important one. Again, it's also about the consumer paradigm, and it relates to social media networks. It's are we still a consumer? And because we're not paying, you may say we're paying with our data, but are we really? And is there a choice? Because there's not a choice to say, well, I want to use Facebook, but I don't want them to harvest my data, and let me just pay a fee, and for them to use the network, but for them not to use my data. So how much choice do we really have as a consumer, and are we not a commodity? So are we kind of not distracted by, you know, the twinkling lights of the social media network? Well, at the same time, we're being harvested as a commodity for our data and our movements on the internet. So this sounds very ominous, but that's, I know I see Gilberto nodding, but this is really problematic. And this is really where the system starts to, you know, shake everywhere.
Yeah, actually, I also read that my presentation sounds gloomy or doomy on technology. But I think the thing is that what we are trying to say is that technology is not, as I just said, is not neutral, and you have to think about how you want to use technology in your society as a whole, but also in organizations.
Yeah.
So, and I also saw a question from someone, Franco Diaz, who said, well, how is the Dutch government actually investing in skills, management skills, IT skills, etc.? It's just also giving really classes to top managers in the public sector, explaining the first and the second chamber, giving them classes as well. So they actually know about biases in data, because really they don't know. And if you explain it to them, they start understanding what happens when you use data or when you use algorithms. So it's actually also basic knowledge that has to be well, given lectures to people in government areas, in government organizations.
Yeah. And I guess I would add also that there is a very huge importance focusing on civic organizing and communities on the ground that are doing stuff with technology. I think we have this big dream of, oh, no, we need Facebook here. We need these big companies to come in and to show us what is being done while we are a small island development state. So the magnitude of the technological needs will inherently be different. So I would also suggest looking at the Caribbean. I mean, Barbados is doing a lot of great things. There's so many new policies regulating crypto, creating living labs, and we're actually running behind from Caribbean countries. And so although the EU has great funding opportunities and has a great way of seeing how this can work in a interdependent, huge supranational context, locally speaking, we need to look at people that are doing things in a small scale.
Yes, I agree with that. Thank you, Gilberto. If I look, when I look at the Q&A box, are there any questions that you would like to address, Cokky or Pauline? Because I think we have time for maybe just one more question.
Well, I see Reynold asking for doing a PhD, which is of course a very good start to getting for skills. So you can always contact me on my email address, and probably also Pauline, how things are going in Utrecht. So we will be happy to answer that question.
That will be an excellent starting point for doing some research on this topic. Okay, I think that we can conclude now the webinar. So I want to thank you to all the guest speakers, Professor Hilhorst and Pauline Phoa for your presentation, and also to Gilberto Morishaw for commenting on the presentation and asking questions relating to the smallness also the island of Curaçao, Aruba, and the other Caribbean jurisdictions. I would like also to thank all our participants for taking time and to be with us and joining us in this webinar. So thank you again, and I hope to see you soon again. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.